Good evening. I'm Loretta Reynolds, Dean of the Chapel here at Berea College, and I want to welcome you to our annual Accent on Christian Faith Convocation. In 1878, Mr. and Mrs. Hempel donated funds for an endowment to support this lectureship, and it was with the hope and the prayer that this program would be a continual reminder that Berea College was founded on the Christian belief that God has made of one blood all peoples of the earth. We are delighted that this year's accent speaker is Reverend Gail Bowman, who is a former director of our Willis D. Weatherford Jr. Campus Christian Center. Beginning in 2012, we had the great good fortune of her leadership for 4 years. But in 2016, she could no longer resist her interest in moving to Birmingham, Alabama to do history research. Reverend Gail holds degrees from Howard University School of Divinity, Harvard University School of Law, and University of Iowa. Before coming to Berea, Reverend Gail was chaplain and assistant professor at Spelman College in Atlanta and Dillard University in New Orleans, where she was the university chaplain before, during, and after the Hurricane Katrina event. She has had many years of experience in caretaking and strengthening faith on college campuses in all kinds of times. Reverend Gail, Berea College, and our wider community, we were all changed for the better because of your investment in us. Thank you for the years spent with us, and thank you for being with us tonight. So Reverend Gail, it's so good to see you.
It's good to see you. Can I say it? Good evening, Berea College. Go ahead.
Of course you can say it. Oh, well, you know, since this is our Accent on Christian Faith Convocation, I would like to start off by asking you maybe a very obvious question, but did you choose Christianity, or did your upbringing, your family, how you were raised, where you were raised, did Christianity, was it chosen for you?
Reverend Doctor, I think that's a good question and a fair question. And point of fact, Christianity happened twice for me. The first time was a family thing. You go to church, and if you go to a Baptist church, they expect you eventually to come up and present yourself for baptism and so forth. And I did that at about the time people were expecting me to do it, partly because people were expecting me to do it. But also I had an ulterior motive, which is I found Christianity very curious. I had tons of questions, and my Sunday school teachers did not always appreciate my questions. And I thought, this is great. I'll become a Christian, and that way I'll know all the answers to these questions. So I got baptized, and not much changed. And I was very disappointed by that. So time went on. And then in my late 20s, I finally figured out that I probably needed to take this into my own hands. And I presented myself again, got baptized again. This was in another city, got baptized again, but I made it my business at that point to ask questions and to find answers, and live with the fact that sometimes I didn't find answers, but to satisfy my curiosity as a Christian.
Okay. Well, you have a law degree from Harvard, and you practiced law in Washington, D.C. for several years, and then you went to seminary. Now, that's a pretty big change of direction. Can you tell us why, and how does one make that kind of career change, moving from a lawyer to a minister?
Well, I think for most of our students, but in particular the African-American students, when you announce to your family that you're going from practicing law to thinking about ministry, that's not a happy day. In the household, it was not a happy day, but I never really liked law. It's very contentious. It's very competitive. I learned a lot of bad language. I learned how to use it very well. But it was just, and it's not very creative. I think at the highest levels, practicing law is very creative, but it's not very, it's pretty, it's pretty kind of day to day on the other levels. I just was not a happy lawyer. And I prayed a dangerous prayer, which I asked God, what is it you want me to do with my life? And if you tell me, I promise I'll go do it. And so it was the result of that dangerous prayer. The family didn't like that story either. But I felt I was called, but I knew I was called. I felt I was called at that time. And in the fullness of time, my experience in ministry, I was called. I wasn't as good at it as I would like to have been, but I certainly knew I was in the right place doing what God had built me to do.
So you went to seminary, and often we think of seminary then leads to being a pastor or something like that. But you spent time as a college chaplain at Spelman and at Dillard, and then at Berea College as the director of our Campus Christian Center. What led you into college chaplaincy?
I tried the church thing first. Part of my fascination obviously was the Black church. I think the Black church is a powerhouse, and I was very interested and excited about participating in that world. But I could not get employed. The churches were very uncomfortable with women in ministry. And I just, after about a year looking, my mentor and I sat down and said, okay, what's plan B? So plan B was to go to Pittsburgh Seminary and do administrative work at Pittsburgh Seminary. And it was at Pittsburgh that I figured out, let's do some more hunting. And I found an ad looking for college minister at Spelman College. And I thought, this is a national search. There's no way I have a chance, but let me try. And lo and behold, that was one of the most extraordinary phone calls I ever got, was come to Spelman. I realized it would work for me and 3 schools and that kind of work, because I liked the conversation. I liked the questioning. I liked the exploring. And young people in college age do that. And in point of fact, when I was in college, I had tons of questions, but nobody had asked them. So one of the nice things was at Berea and Dillard and Spelman, students had somebody to ask. They still do.
Well, that brings us around to your title, which is very interesting. It's the irrefutable power of a really good question. That's quite provocative. Could you unpack that for us?
I would be happy to. There are 2 parts and they connect. The first part, of course, is what are we talking about when we're talking about power? And when we're talking about power, I'm not talking about political power or economic power or the ability to be coercive with folks and make them do things that they don't want to do. When we're talking about power in the theological sense, in the God sense, it is the power to create. And that is what is so majestic about God, is you have this limitless power to create. And since we are created by God, we have a little bit of that in us too. We have a little bit of power to create. And on the other part of it, what's a really good question? A really good question is a question that has a true intention of asking, and it actually offers a choice. I think you don't have to think much about that to realize that you've had some questions asked of you at different times that were not great questions. What's the matter with you? That's a question, but it's not a really good question. It's a better way to ask that might be, where does it hurt? Or where do you hurt? Something like that. What's going on with you would be better. Because see what I mean? It actually, there's an intention of getting an answer, and then, a back and forth that is potential there. What were you thinking? I'm sure most people, trust me, no matter what age you are, you have people asking you, what were you thinking? What were you thinking is an interesting question, but it's not the best question in the world. What do you think was going on with you? That's a better question, because there's an intention to actually, when that question is asked, it's clear the person who asked the question intends to listen to what you have to say, and there's something that can happen after that. What do you want? That's not a bad question. But a better one might be, do you know what you want? A really good question is an invitation. It's it's the simplest way I think to put it is to say that not good questions close us, while really good questions open us. So you're probably wondering, what's the link between the power and the questions and so forth? I'm going to state the obvious, so forgive me and hang with me for a second, if you would, please. Questions are different from statements. I mean, that's obvious. If I was just going to say something to you, you can just kind of sit there and wait me out, and maybe you can listen, maybe not listen, whatever. But you don't really need to do anything. You don't need to participate in that. But a really good question pulls you forward. It pulls you into the conversation. For example, if I were to ask you, would you be willing to tell me something about your family? That would often pull you forward. A really good question is a shared thing. And the way I see it is it puts a little tiny hiccup of possibility in that space between the person asking and the person receiving the question. There's a little room that's created in there. Questions, good ones, they connect us. Relationships begin with a question. I'm Gail, what's your name? Or where is home for you? Realizations begin with a question. Somebody might be on one of their labor positions or somewhere, some later in your life, and you're doing something and somebody will stand and watch for a while and say to you, have you thought about doing that for a living? You see that little moment? There's a connection and there's a little hiccup of possibility right in there. Or I could ask you this, I could say, if you could touch the world with a magic wand, what would you give it? Questions are mysterious. They encapsulate a moment. There's a little pause to them. There's a little waiting that happens there. And there's a measure of eternity in that little pause. Questions have the ability to create something that was not there before. A really good question has the power to create something that was not there before.
Wow. That's incredibly interesting. And I see what you're saying, but I'm going to be honest, in my own experience and from the stories that many students have shared with me over the years, asking questions, particularly about faith or about God, is often not welcomed. And sometimes people are even told that asking questions it's wrong to do that. And that somehow asking questions is showing a lack of faith. And so, but you're saying to us that questions are not only good, but they're powerful. So could you tell us more about how asking good questions specifically relates to Christianity?
I would be happy to. And I would also be happy to say for folks that it may come to happen that at some point in your life, you need to find some other folks to ask the questions of. Not a great sentence, but that's what finally had to happen with me. I needed that for my faith. Let's do Bible. There's some from the Bible and I've got some from my life, but I'd like to begin with a really good question that I think that God had a say in it. It's recent. Let me see, hang on, let me get you the best thing here. Jesus asks us great questions, and they're often timeless questions. So that's the response to your what you just asked me, Reverend Doctor, in terms of what's the Christian connection. That's so much of Christianity is built in those questions. He asks these marvelous questions, and they have as much to do with what we are and who we are right now as they did prior to this time. For me, to be a Christian is to live in question land. Christians ask questions, and Christianity asks us questions. And if I'll go back to where I was, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
I have some from the Bible, some from my life. I'd like to begin with a really good question that I think God had a say in. It's recent, and it packs a lot of power, and it comes from Berea colleges, especially the students on lives. On or about June 19th, you received, let me get this straight now, campus announcement regarding the fall 2020 term students, faculty, staff. And on or about June 26th, you received COVID-19 information and agreements for students fall term 2020. That's a whole lot of stuff. But it was also a really good question. Lau Rulas was asking you, but I think God was also asking you, will you continue, and if you're to be a first-year student, will you begin your college education? despite the fact that, as the communication and the policy put it, the fall term at Berea College would be unlike any other in Berea history, and it would not be normal. New and returning students were required to review the information and declare your intentions for participating. All kinds of aspects of your lives were discussed: housing, dining, labor, safety protocols, limitations on typical campus activities, restrictions on leaving the campus or the city of Berea, and restrictions on the possession and use of motor vehicles. You were asked to decide and to declare your intent. And if you were to be on campus, you were asked to swear and promise to comply with all college policies and extraordinary health measures. In other words, Lyle asked, but with God's backing, because Berea College is and always has been a God project, will you claim or reclaim the college for yourself now and under these very difficult circumstances, even though what was being offered was probably very different than what you had had in mind? And once you claimed or reclaimed college for yourself, will you stand strong and proud and honest and do everything you need to do for the benefit of the entire college community? There's a great deal riding on what you're doing right now. Students at home, students in town, students at campus, faculty and staff, also profoundly so. It's not easy. And I want you to know how proud it makes me of you. And this is an unusual, once in a lifetime connection between you and Berea College that was open with the question that was asked of all of you. And something special got created, and you're saying yes. Because you said yes, you will be more from this than you would ever would have been if this had not happened. And the college will be more for this than it would be if this had not happened. It's the indisputable, it's the irrefutable power of a really good question.
So let's circle back around, because of course, Berea College is based on these Christian foundations and on our belief of love over hate, and also the real belief in the power of education to help us understand the equality of all people. And yet, sometimes we're still told that asking questions is not a good thing. And sometimes that specifically comes from religious folks. So how does all of this connect to Christianity?
Okay, let's borrow a question from Jesus, if that's all right. Anybody who knows me has heard me remark about John 5:7. It's one of my very favorite of the Jesus questions. In John 5:7, Jesus comes across a man who is at the pool at Bethesda. He is a paraplegic, he cannot walk, and he has been there for 38 years. The understanding was at that time that an angel would come from time to time, unpredictably, and stir the waters. And whoever got in the waters immediately after them being stirred, just the first person, would have whatever affliction they had would be cured. So the man is here, and he's been waiting 38 years. And Jesus comes and stands over this man, and he says, I'm going to give you the King James Version, wilt thou be made whole? Or the Revised Standard Version, do you want to be healed? And you would expect, first of all, since that's such a huge question, it's about more than his physical condition. It's about his life. It's about who he is. You would expect the man to say yes, but interestingly, he doesn't. He begins to explain to Jesus, well, here's the deal. I haven't been treated fairly. Other people always get to the pool first because I don't have anybody who can help me, and so on and so forth. But at any rate, Jesus just heals him. So what's interesting to me about it is the opportunity that the man insisted would come from the pool ends up in his hands without the pool. It came from another direction. The opportunity to have his legs healed is just the beginning of what he got. He also got a greater experience of somebody that he would spend the rest of his life talking about, which was this encounter with Jesus. So it's more than about his physical condition, and it's more than simply about being able to get to the pool and get what he wants, which is to say that in our lives, so many times we need help, but we're hesitant to ask for it, or we need help and we're so determined that the help is going to come from a certain direction, or the help is going to come in a certain way, that we may be insisting on that without receiving or perceiving the other help options that are there for us. I'm going to go get you an example from my own life. As the Reverend Doctor mentioned, I was on Dillard's campus for a number of years. From time to time, a student would ask to be baptized. They usually wanted immersion, which meant that I would often have to find one of the local pastors and ask to either borrow their pool, or the next time they do baptizing, can we come and baptize a student in the pool after you finished, or whatever it is. I ran into an instance with a student who wanted to be baptized, and I could not get any of the pastors to agree to let me borrow their pool or come in behind one of their baptisms. I don't know why, but it hurt my feelings, it offended me. And I was walking across campus one day in what I call full fuss mode. I have this ability to really fuss, you know, and once I get cranked up, remember I was a lawyer. Once I get cranked up, I can just really, really fuss. So I was fussing and I was fussing at Jesus. I'm like, do you see what they're doing to me here? Do you see me trying to do what you've asked me to do? Do you see it not working? At which point Jesus asked me a really good question, which was, aren't you on a campus with a swimming pool? Well, matter of fact, yes, I was. So I took my little bottle of water from the River Jordan and put a few drops in the swimming pool and consecrated it, and we went ahead and had that baptism. But it's that whole kind of ancient question that has a modern life as well. Are you willing to be helped? Are you willing to change? Are you willing to accept it the way I'm giving it to you, as opposed to the way you thought you might get it? That help?
It does. But I wonder, since the Bible is the foundational text for Christianity, are there other examples?
There are a lot of others, and it took me 3 weeks to edit it down. I have so many favorites, but I have another one that will be familiar to a lot of you, I'm sure. It shows up in 3 of the Gospels, in Matthew and in Mark and in Luke. The lawyer comes to Jesus and says, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus points him to the scriptures. He asks him, well, what do the scriptures say? Nice question. And he responds, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And going beyond that, and it's in the vestibule of the chapel, as well in the picture that you saw on the screen just as we were waiting to begin, has that scripture, the version from Matthew in the background. But it's not a don't, it's a do. And it says, you shall love. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength and all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. At which point, after a little bit of back and forth, as many of you will recall, the man asked, well, who's my neighbor? So we get into this marvelous story about a certain man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And as the Bible puts it, he falls among thieves. And the thieves, they beat him, they steal his belongings, they tear his garments, they just really work him over, you know what I'm talking about, and leave him for dead. The thieves thought that they pretty much had killed him. So he's there on the side of the road, and a priest comes by and sees him. And as the Bible says, he passes by on the other side. Now, there's a reason for this. The priests were required not to be in the presence of a recently deceased body. They were required not to be there. And the priest was afraid that if he did something, probably that the man might die on him, and then he'd be, in religious trouble. And here comes a Levite, another man, makes a similar decision, makes the same decision, passes by on the other side. And then here comes a Samaritan. Now, the point of the Samaritan is that the Israelites were not fond of the Samaritans. They did not think highly of them. But in this instance, the Samaritan sees this man, and as the scripture says, he had compassion on him. So the Samaritan takes the man and he binds up his wounds as best he can. He collects his little belongings, what were left of him. He puts the man on his donkey. he takes him to what, kind of a little way station, a little kind of hostel kind of place that you can leave folks, and turns the man over, and he leaves money. He said, please take care of him, and I will be back on my way back through, and if you spent more than I've left you, I will pay for that. And then again, we're back to that really good question. Jesus asked the man, so which was neighbor to the man who was beaten? And the lawyer has to accept the Samaritan. So it's the same, who showed him mercy. So it's a question for today, it's a question for then. But I will also point out, in response to the reverend's question, given the number of questions in the Bible, given the back and forth, I'm not quite sure how we got the idea that back and forth is not allowed, or back and forth should not happen. People get confused, they have questions, they want to know, they encounter Jesus and they ask each other questions. The woman at the well, Jesus, has the encounter with the woman at the well, and she runs from the well singing, come see a man who told me all things that ever I did. Is that not the Christ? So there's another question. So what I couldn't understand in my youth, and I still don't understand, quite frankly, is why we would see all these questions and see the marvelous experiences that come out of the back and forth, why we would see that and be concerned about it. If you're asking God a question, whether you're Christian or not, if you're asking God a question, what that means is that you have an expectation that there might be a benefit from doing that. So it's not a lack of faith, it is faith. Because if you had no faith, you wouldn't bother. But the asking is part of what, I think it's built in our DNA. I think it's part of I think we're hardwired to ask. The Bible says, ask and it shall be, they'll be given, and so forth and so on. We're encouraged time after time after time. I don't know where it came from, but you do reach the point with your faith. And I will say this, I'll just be very frank about it. The Reverend Doctor and I were talking about it the other day. With the exception of a spouse of some kind, if you decide at some point to marry or to be very close with someone, very intimate with someone, with the exception of that, this is the only thing that is similar to that in the sense of your faith is a very intimate matter. Yes, it has to do with your parents and your grandparents and your church and so forth and so on. And obviously we're built in our faith by our encounters with one another. But what the old folks used to say in my life, and I didn't understand it till I was older, which is God has no grandchildren, which is to say God does not reach us through other people. God reaches us direct. And if it's direct, obviously there's some questions and answers that are going to go back and forth in those circumstances. You don't need to be rude, you don't need to be crude, but you do need to feel free. Since God loves you so much, you need to feel free to ask.
Well, Reverend Gail, I know that there are a lot of people out there who probably will want to ask you some questions.
I brought it on myself.
So we are going to invite those out there in Zoom land to begin sending their questions in via the Q&A. But as they begin to do that, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we will get to their answers, to their questions. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay. So my big question, I think, is in the midst of a pandemic and national race tensions and the upcoming elections, what are some of the powerful questions that you think we need to be asking today?
I'll take us back. I think the question of the day in many ways is, who's my neighbor? I think it's the same question. One of the experiences I had with Katrina was one of the most powerful experiences I've had with prayer, which is the campus was in such bad shape and we were in such bad shape for so long, but I really felt upheld by the prayers of the nation. I'd never had that experience before, but I just really felt like folk like yourself, they've got me. You know what I mean? They're praying for us, they're praying for me, and so forth and so on. And with this dilemma, with an international pandemic, you've got this international web of prayer in which we try to uphold one another. But I think that is the sense of it that we need to have. There's been a lot of conversation in this country about us being in it together here, but it goes far beyond here, and it goes far beyond us. We are in it together as humanity. We are in it together as the, you know, all the peoples of the earth. You know what I mean? They're made of one blood. We are in it and togetherness in that sense, which means that to me, part of it, it's easy, very, very easy to get caught up in a lot of what we've got going on here. And trust me, you know, I love politics. I love, you know, news and so forth and so on. So I've been in deep. But I also have had to spend an extra amount of time just on the question of who is my neighbor. Some days it feels like my neighbor is here, and some days it feels like my neighbor is far, far away in a place that I don't know, and a person I will never meet. And every once in a while you hear a news story that just brings that to you from elsewhere. We're struggling here, but not nearly so. You know, India is struggling profoundly, and I was surprised. I've forgotten what nation it was that has the highest death rate, but I was surprised by it. But it's the question of who is my neighbor, and what shall I do about that? You know, with the Samaritan, you appreciate the man. The man had purse. You know what I'm saying? He had cash, and he had means and so forth. And for a lot of people, they have no means. They don't have enough means for themselves. But we do have our spirits. We do have our minds. We do have our hearts, and we can still do whatever it takes to do something every day in some way, shape, or form for our neighbor, somehow or another, and trust that our neighbors got us too.
Thank you. So we have a question. It says, how do I stay, in quotes, high when I perceive others going so very low?
Oh, it's the Michelle Obama question. I agree. I struggle with it as well. I made a commitment when the president was elected to pray for him, because I'd prayed for Obama for 8 years. I thought, well, you can certainly pray for Trump. He makes it difficult some days. But I think the way you stay high is you understand that it's not a competition, that belief and spirituality, Christianity is not a competition, which is to say, it's just about you and your close Christian connections, your church group, or whoever it is that helps you and buoys you up in your faith, to stay there. And it's very, my theology professor in seminary used to say, part of the challenge with sin is it's sweet. There's something about bad mouthing that just works for folks. You know what I mean? We can really whip up a nice head of steam on bad mouthing, but it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, you know, ultimately. And so to just kind of stay with to stay with the people who strengthen your faith, to help strengthen their faith when they need it. But to stay high means you're going to have to turn down some of that very tempting bad mouthing that's going on. You're not going to be able to participate in all that and stay high. You just can't.
Yeah. Okay. So here's another question. Hi, Reverend Bowman. My name is Sean Mack, and I'm a student chaplain. Thank you so much for all your great insight. My question for you is, do you believe that there can be more than one right answer to the questions we ask God?
Absolutely. I do. I wish I could give a good example. I'm not sure that I can, but I've had different answers to the same question prayed at different times in my life, which is to say, I think part of what it has to do is I can ask a question at a certain point in my life and get an answer from God, which is a good answer for that day. But later on, having had an experience that I had not had when I asked the first question, I may get a different answer. My capability changes, I think. My lens certainly changes. You know what I mean? Some of the, one of the things I loved about Berea College is the rich international student body. Oh my goodness. And my exposure to them gave me so many different lenses, and I discovered new answers in having those lenses. I didn't know that I wasn't close in some instances, but then I hear something, they ask me something, we have an experience, and I get another answer the next time because I'm ready for it. I've grown up a little bit.
And I wonder too if it's about our own personal, where we are and where we've been in our experiences, but also I am different than you, that different people have different experiences. So an answer that God may give me may not be the same as what God gives someone else.
That has been my experience as well. And I have a phrase for it, which I call somebody else's prayers, which is, we know what's on our mind and we know what's going on with ourselves and so forth and so on, but we don't know what other people's prayers are. St. Augustine, the famous North African, used to say that God loves every one of us as if there's only one of us to love. And to me, that gives you just a hint of just how detailed and how person specific that experience is. That we have God's attention as if there was no one else to have God's attention.
Right. Okay, I'm going to move to the next question. During the conversation, Reverend Gail said, Berea College is and always has been a God project. I would like to know what she means by this. How can a person coming from a different place, that's all I see on the, okay, let's just go with that first part.
Okay.
What do you mean by saying that Berea College is a God project?
I thought that might be a question. John Greg Fee has to be one of the most underquoted, brilliant theological minds I have ever encountered. I was back in his book. I have pieces of it that I have typed up, pieces of it that I borrowed from Alistine, and it just goes on and on. What an extraordinary man. And what a real, authentic lover of neighbor he was. I'm not sure how many opportunities students get these days to get into the story with depth, but he was, among other things, he was one of the chaplains for the Union Army. And so some of his exposure to African Americans in those cases recently, very, very recently, enslaved African Americans, came through that work. And for those of you who do not know, in terms of numbers that we're talking here, 209,000 people of color served the Union side in the Civil War, 209,000. So this was one of the major events of the war, was just the people leaving plantations and so forth and coming with almost nothing in terms of worldly goods. But he and his wife, the experience that they had in many ways spawned Berea College. You know, they got close, they stayed close, and at the end of the war, as far as I can tell, I don't know the specific details of it, he had no interest whatsoever in parting from these people that he considered brothers and sisters and so forth and so on. He was a praying man. He talks about other experiences and so forth that he'd had, but it's very clear that that scripture that is used by the college is the most exact possible description of how he perceived the world that would exist. And the college was born out of that fierce, almost fearless faith and energy he had to transform as much of the world as he could get his hands on while he still had breath in his body.
So the rest of that question just came through. So
okay.
Let me ask the rest of it. So it says, how can a person from a different place be able to see that Berea College is God's project And how can they interpret that with things that happen on campus?
As is true of our world itself, I think you get, in fact, it's true of some churches as well. You get kind of a mixed bag. It's a little bit more evident in some things that it is, but there are just some standard pieces of Berea College to me that are that do not change and are evidence of that. Part of it, of course, as I say, is the presence of a large number of international students, which does not change no matter what else happens. Part of it is just the confidence, I think, and the ability of these students that God has done everything possible to make a way for them. And part of the way we'll make a way for them is to have them carry on their labor and get the strength in their bodies and their experience that they can carry to other places, how they perceive themselves. And they also will have the privilege of being able to say that they help work for their education. Obviously, the presence of the Campus Christian Center, the prioritizing of the various activities of the center, the existence of Accent on Christian Faith Week, the existence of baccalaureate. The baccalaureate still continues, and quite frankly, I think the college would be bereft, and I know that you were partly bereft, to have to say goodbye to a graduating class without just blessing them all over their bodies. You know what I mean? There's that. So you get, it's very modern, it's very contemporary, and there are many things that are done, but there's always that undercurrent of this did not begin with, let me put it this way, this did not begin on earth, it began in heaven. It did not begin here, it began there. Having him quoted around campus helps that too. I used to love walking around and reading the quotes. You know, if you're walking by them, sometimes stop and read some of the quotes.
Yeah. Right, so I think we have time for one more. This is a question from an anonymous attendee. It says, after years of family hardships, I prayed and prayed, but my prayers were never answered. I unfortunately lost faith in prayer because of this. Am I impatient, or is it a part of God's plan? I would like to regain my faith. I just feel lost.
You are not impatient. What you are, you're heartbroken. You're heartbroken. And it happens. There's a lot of that going around right now. But the fact that there's plenty of it doesn't change your situation at all. You're heartbroken. And I do think that heartbreak is, when they talk about, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that's an apt description for heartbreak. You didn't die, but my guess is that somebody did. And you just find yourself in darkness. Walk on, is what I would say. Just walk on. You will find, I think you will find it again, because you miss it. And in missing it, you understand that it's a part of who you intend to be, who you are. And you will find your way eventually back into, I hate to say light, because I get a little impatient with the light and darkness back and forth, but you will find your way back to faith, back to an expression, back to the beginning of your next series of questions. You have lots of questions. And since we've discussed that you don't have to feel embarrassed about having them, we can skip that part and just go forward. But it's not lack of faith, it's heartbreak. And it happens.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I will add you to my prayer list, Mr. or Ms. or the anonymous. I will add you to my prayer list.
So one more question has come in, and I think it's a great one to end on, actually. So I'm going to put it in there. This is from Landon Beaver. What advice, yes, our Landon Beaver.
I was going to say, I know Landon. Okay, gotcha.
Student chaplain, yes.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for continuing God's project and asking really good questions after and beyond the Berea bubble?
Just ask. Part of what I find so interesting about what you guys are doing right now, trust me, you will get extraordinary results from this. It's not pretty now, and I'm not saying it'll be pretty later, but it will be extraordinary. So you just press on. Whatever you feel called to do, whatever you are intending to do, assume that God will deal with you as earnestly and with as high expectations wherever you go next and go in, the fullness of time as right now. You can leave Berea, but I'm not sure that for the people who graduate, I'm not sure the Berea ever leaves them. If you want to hold on to the vividness and the robustness of this experience, I think that's already gone to God's ear, and that will be part of your experience. May you be blessed in the doing thereof.
Okay. Do you have any final things you would like to share with us?
I apologize that I was not able to come to you in the way that we had originally envisioned and talked about. Obviously, you understand why. I don't have to explain it. But I'm grateful to you, and I'm grateful to God, and I'm grateful to Mackenzie and the others who helped put this together, and certainly the Reverend Doctor always, to make it possible for me to have a little bit of time with you, even though I could not do it on campus. I was really looking forward to a little bit of time with you, and I will be contemplating your questions and so forth and so on as the days to come. I thank you so much for honoring me with your time and your care and your questions. Thank you so much.
Well, Reverend Gail, we thank you for being with us tonight, and just we'll let people know that we are hoping that this time next year, you will actually be here on campus with us. So we will look forward to that as well. So thank you so much. It has been such a delight to talk with you tonight.
Thank you.
And I want to thank all of you who have joined us tonight. In these days that can be so full of isolation and anxiety and frustration, may you know the peace and the comfort of God. And may you find the irrefutable power of asking really good questions. Good night.
Well, on behalf of Convocations, I would also like to add my great thank you to you, Reverend Gail, for being such a special guest, and also to Reverend Loretta for moderating this conversation. And of course, thanks to Mackenzie for the tech support. So please join us thank you, next Thursday for a Stevenson Memorial Concert with banjo and fiddle player Jacob Blunt, who will kick off the celebration of the traditional music weekend. And he is amazing. So everyone be safe, have a good night, and see you next time. Bye-bye.